Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you are logging in from today. My name is Greg Owen-Boger, and I am the EVP of Learning and Business Development here at Turpin Communication. Co-facilitating with me today is our president and founder, Dale Ludwig.
Oh, good to see you all
Dale
here.
has been Dale has been dealing with a four-legged coworker. Did he get himself settled down, Dale?
That's, well,
Very
left the office. That may not mean settle down, but we'll see.
Well, fingers are crossed. So, welcome aboard, everybody. We are here for presentation skills for subject matter experts, or as we like to call them, SMEs. How to be clear and concise when your brain is full of data. So, if you work in any sort of highly technical area and you have a hard time making sense of things for other people who are not living in your data heavy world, you are in the right place today. So let's go ahead and get started. Our agenda for this hour looks like this. We are going to work through some guiding principles of effective communication. Then we're going to switch gears and work on some audience analysis and content analysis. In other words, getting your head together before the presentation starts. Then we're going to switch to a concept we call framing. In other words, setting context for your audience so that you are answering the questions, what are we talking about and why? And then we will talk through some skills, techniques, and insights for making it easy, both for you as the SME, the presenter, and then also for your audience members. So let's go ahead and get started. This image right here is your brain. This image here is your brain on data. So you can imagine that you working with Legos in a pile of all different sorts of colors and shapes and sizes, and they're all just sort of floating around in your brain. Now, we're going to unpack this concept here, but I do want to give credit to the woman who came up with this. Her name is Wendy Castillo, and she has been all over LinkedIn the last couple of years with this concept. So here's what she says and how she does it graphically. So here we have a pile of data. Your job as a subject matter expert trying to make sense of that data for other people is to get that information sorted so that you can start to get your arms around how to communicate it. But that's not good enough yet. We need to take it to another step, which is to present it visually, make sense of it so it looks appealing for the people that you are working with. But she goes on to say, that still isn't enough. We need to make that information useful and paint a picture for people of what they should do with this information. And I really like this metaphor because it does such a good job of explaining the mess that can be in our head and the job at hand to make sense for other people. Now, just in case it's not clear, the sorted and presented visually pieces, that happens during preparation. But the making useful, that happens when the conversation actually starts, once the presentation actually starts. So we will be talking through skills, techniques, and insights to help you with this concept. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Turpin Communication, we work with, or we are communication consultants and trainers, and we work with a variety of different types of communicators, presenters, meeting facilitators, and trainers. And the concepts that we work through today will be applicable to whatever type of communication situation you face. Now, when you've done something as long as Dale and I have, and we are well over 30 years at this point, sometimes you write books, and we have written a handful of them. Three of them are right here along the bottom of the screen. The Orderly Conversation, which we will start to unpack a little bit later. The Virtual Orderly Conversation, which you will have access to once the webinar is over. And then also Effective SMEs. So we've actually written a book, How to Make It Easy for Subject Matter Experts. So the first concept I want to work through right here is that as a business communicator, you wear two hats. One hat is very comfortable. The other one, probably not so much since you are in this webinar. So the expert hat is the one that's comfortable. You understand your data, you examine details. Over time, you amass know-how, and you gain that expertise that makes you so very good at the work that you do. But your work doesn't end there. You have to be a communicator at times. And this, as I said, this hat is a little uncomfortable for many of us. So when we're wearing this hat, what we need to do is set context for the communication. We need to be clear relate to others, seek to be understood, share your own stories and your experiences, and aid other people in their decision making. So that is the next level of the communication job at hand. And as I am talking, I am realizing I forgot to introduce a very important person on our team. Somehow I got myself distracted. We'll talk about why I was distracted here in a minute when we get to a concept called cognitive load. But anyway, I want to introduce Kevin Vogelsang. He is our director of operations. He's not on video right now because he is our host, and he's taking really good care of us in terms of video and audio experience. Now, if you do have technical issues, Kevin Vogelsang, he's your guy. Go ahead and send him a private message in the chat. So anyway, getting back to this concept, you have to get comfortable wearing both of these hats, the expert hat and the communicator. Here's another concept. Because your brain is so full, there's a lot of stuff rolling around in there. Your audience doesn't want all that information. One of the things that they task you with is making sense of it and paring it down. So what your audience needs is much less than all of the information that is in your brain. And I am absolutely certain on a certain level, you understand that concept. The tricky part is actually making that work once the meeting, the presentation, or the training session kicks in. Now, enough of me talking. Let's get you talking. As a SME, what communication challenges do you face? Let's start with chat, and then if we need some clarification, we will turn off mute and we'll talk about what you put into chat. But what are the challenges that you face? And by the way, when I'm looking over here, I'm just looking at my second monitor. I have all of your videos over here and a couple other tools. Well, actually, Euron, I could say the four-legged coworkers, that's a challenge we all face, right? If we have pets in our house, but that's probably not what other people are thinking. Collard says, I need to be more concise with my delivery. That is a typical concern for sure. Matthew says, editing so that I provide the information that people actually need, not all of what I know. Yeah. Felicia says, feeling like I'm keeping the audience's attention. Yeah, if you're giving them a lot of data, the likelihood is greater that they could check out because it's hard work for them. Matthew adds engaging people in the audience. Santosh, and I hope I'm saying your name correctly. If not, I apologize. Santosh says, composing and effectively communicating what I want to convey precisely or concisely. Allison says dealing with those multitasking rather than paying attention and participating. Yeah, the multitasking thing is a real challenge. We'll talk a little bit about that, time permitting. Aaron adds, understanding if the audience is even interested in the content. Yeah, and that is your job to make them be interested. And we will talk a little bit about how to do that. All right, well, thank you very much for all of that. Dale, I'm going to stop sharing so you can talk us through the guiding principles. Share your screen.
Okay, here we go. I assume my screen is visible. Greg, is it there for you?
It is. Yes, it is.
Okay, great. As Greg said, I'm going to talk about guiding principles, which means I'm going to take sort of a step back to sort of set context for this whole conversation today and help you understand how we look at communication in general and how it applies to your role as a subject matter expert. So let's look at this image first. When it comes to business communication, we like to talk about the fact that you're working on this continuum. You're working somewhere between informal conversations on the left and then formal conversations on the right. Let me talk about what that means a little more specifically. On the left-hand side of the arrow, we have conversations and chance encounters, which means these are probably not prepared. As you can see in these images, you've got people in a break room or people having a cup of coffee and having a chat. They may be talking about work and they may be coming to a decision about things, but there probably wasn't much preparation put into this. It's just a very spontaneous interaction. Now, on the other end, we have very formal kinds of communication. We've got speeches and TED Talks here. Many times people come to us and say, "Oh, I want to be as good as those TED speakers." And we always say, that would be nice, but it probably has nothing to do with your job because you're not delivering a TED talk at work because they are way more structured, memorized, rehearsed, very formal types of interaction. What most people deal with is, as we call, an orderly conversation. As you can see in all of these circles, we've got a variety of interactions here. Some presenters are standing, some are seated, some are working virtually, some are working in a hybrid environment. They're at like the 7 o'clock position on that in that circle. So we've got a whole lot of different types of interactions here. All of them, their characteristics in that they are both trying to get business done. They're very practical, and they have, as you can see at the bottom, they are planned, they are structured, and they're responsive and interactive. So what we're dealing with an orderly conversation is a process that has these two characteristics. One, on the orderly side, they are about preparation, accuracy, structure. All of those things are important. But on the other hand, as the interaction takes place, it has to be a conversation, which means engagement is important, spontaneity, interactivity. For a subject matter expert, the tension between these two processes is stronger than it is for someone who's not a subject matter expert because your your brains tend to maybe focus on the accuracy and the preparation process more than they focus on the conversation. Because when you think about how this process works, during the preparation part, you're always looking ahead to the uncertainties of the conversation because you never know, as you've already said in chat, you don't know how people are going to react. You don't know how focused they're going to be. You don't know how interested they're going to be. And so you've got to do all you can to adapt in the moment to that perspective, which means as the conversation goes forth, you're adapting what was planned to what's happening in the moment. And as I said before, for some people, that's a comfortable thing to do. For others, it's not at all, because it means learning how to use the preparation that you put into it to keep the conversation going, not let that preparation and that data and all that content drive the delivery of the information. It has to be the conversation that's taking place that drives it. So what that means is, big picture, success occurs through the conversation. And that is an easy process to understand. But when you're in the moment, delivering information, and people are throwing you off, or your order that you wanted to go in, they just told you, could you start at the bottom? And that might completely throw you off your game because you have to adapt in the moment using the content that you have prepared in advance. So if we break this down a little bit further, we can see that business communication succeeds on two different levels. This is related to the orderly conversation circles, but it goes into a bit more detail. First of all, you succeed when you achieve your goal. That means you get whoever you're communicating with to, well, here the list is buy, agree, align, or learn. Those are all business goals. And as the conversation takes place, you want to lead that group to those goals. The process, though, is about managing the conversation as it takes place. And that breaks down to these points: create the conditions for a fruitful discussion, earn trust and goodwill. Sorry about the cat tail in the picture. Earn trust and goodwill, make it easy, nurture relationships, and manage the give and take. And all of those things are part of that conversational process that I was just talking about. And a couple of these I want to point out. One, the one right in the middle, make it easy. Again, that sounds like a simple concept, but when you're in the moment, when you're delivering information and you feel like you're losing the people that you're talking to, you have to decide, well, what can I do now to make it easy for these folks? Because obviously I'm not helping them understand what I need them to understand. So that requires decisions in the moment. It requires cutting back on information that you really, really want to deliver because you find it really interesting, but they may not. So you always have to think about, what do they need right now? It's my responsibility as a person leading this communication to make sure they are with me. It's not, you can't make the assumption, oh, they'll follow along, they'll pay attention to me because I'm the one in charge. That's not the case at all. You always have to work hard to bring them on board. And also that means earning trust and goodwill over time, because you want to be the sort of communicator that people look forward to working with because you make the process easy. You've earned their trust, and they're willing to listen to what you have to say. But doing that requires in the moment decision making that we'll be talking about a little bit later on. And as I said before, for a subject matter expert, these two types of success, these two levels of success, are more challenging to achieve than the average presenter. Okay, Greg, back to you.
All right. I am going to share my screen again and get us into the next agenda item, which is getting your head together. So, shocker, there are two phases to putting together your presentation. There's the preparation, and then there's the actual the delivery of the presentation. So we want to spend some time in the preparation, really getting your head together. What are you trying to accomplish? And we have a tool that we are going to give you later in the webinar. We don't want to give it to you now because you might be downloading it and then you would be distracted. And as people said, that's a little bit alarming when you are presenting. So we will give you the download a little bit later. By the way, you are also going to receive a follow-up email. That will come tomorrow. This tool will be linked to there as well. But anyway, this tool is called the Framing Strategy Worksheet, and it is a tool that will walk you through the analysis of all parts of getting your head together. So in order for this to make sense, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce you to a little story, and Dale is going to walk us through each step of this tool, and then I will layer in story components. So that's what I'm going to do right now. Let's say that I'm an analyst in research and development, and let's say that I work for a food manufacturing company. So, like many of you, I'm an expert. I am highly technical, but yet I still have to communicate with people throughout the organization. And I work with data or information from three primary sources. One is scientific research. So I'm working with other experts. I work with market research, again, more experts. And then I also work with people in the manufacturing capability area. Because of some recent supply chain issues, if you work in manufacturing, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I'm working with this guy named Glenn. He is our vendor relations manager. And these supply chain issues have been a real stumbling block for us. So, Dale, I'm going to turn it over to you so you can start walking us through each of these steps, and then I'll layer in story as we move
Okay,
forward.
sure. The first step here, and of course, you don't have to go in the order that we're recommending here. It's just that this is the one we find most natural and maybe easier. But the first step is to identify the goal of the presentation that you're working on. So as you can see on the left, at the end of my presentation, I want my audience to do, think, or feel what. Important to think about those verbs, do, think, or feel, because it will help you identify exactly how you want them to respond to the information you're delivering. As we can see on the other side, on the right-hand side of this, if you can scoot over there, Greg, thank you. Let's look at persuasive versus informative. In a persuasive situation, you're making a recommendation for your audience to do something. So you want to make sure that's clear at the beginning so that they know where they're headed. But in an informative presentation, you want to emphasize how you want your audience to think or feel about the information you're delivering. That is sometimes a very subtle distinction, sometimes a very big distinction. But if you think, well, first of all, I think every presentation is persuasive to a certain degree. But it's that in those informative situations, sometimes in persuasive rather situations, there's a lot of new information being delivered. But always consider the information as being part of some sort of persuasive goal. You want to make sure, as it says here, you want to be as specific as possible and as persuasive as possible. How do you want them to think? You want simple things like be comfortable with this information. That's a persuasive statement. I want you to feel good, feel confident with what I'm delivering today. Other recommendations, as you can see, moving down the side of the slide, you you want to make sure that you're avoiding simply saying you want them to understand or know something, because we hear that all the time. What's your goal? I want them to understand this new process. And we always say it's better that they buy, accept, believe, agree to, understand the usefulness of this new process so that they have some sort of practical context to put everything inside. It's so easy to when you're a SME to base your statement of goals simply on what you're presenting, not how you want people to use what you're presenting. Greg, let's look at the example that you have here.
Yeah, so as I think about the goal for my presentation and what I'm trying to accomplish with this particular group, this is what I'm thinking. I want them to be comfortable making a decision, and that decision is, are we going to go or no go with product X? So again, I work in R&D and we've got this new product, but we're not sure, given all of the supply chain issues that we've got, should we go or no go? So my job is to help my listeners be comfortable making that decision.
But
And
both
that brings us to step
what,
two.
sorry,
Sorry, Dale, go ahead.
that's a feeling. You want them to feel comfortable making that decision rather than just make a decision. There's a distinction there that's important for the situation. Okay, step two, assess your audience. This is an easy step to skip from my experience, from what I've seen. And you want to take the time. You don't have to answer every one of these questions on this page, but some of them are going to be relevant. I just want to point out a couple things here. Starts off on the upper left. Who's your audience and what is their relationship to you? Sometimes that's a really important thing to think about, sometimes not so much. Are there key people in the audience? In other words, is there a decision maker there that is going to be the primary person that you're talking to, and then the others who you want to also bring along? What are the pain points for your audience? Are there things happening with them that they're extremely worried about right now? What's the connection between those pain points and what you're delivering? Are you solving them? Are you taking them away? Or are you it's sort of a different topic altogether? And you need to deal with the fact that they're really overwhelmingly concerned with a topic different than your own. Let's see what else. Will they be difficult to persuade? Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes not all of them, sometimes some of them. So you want to make sure that you're thinking about how hard your job is going to be and adapting not only your goal, but also the rest of the how you organize the presentation to their needs. Let's I Rather than talking about more of these, let's do your example, Greg. I may have covered
Sure.
most of
Sure. So as I think about my audience, they are leaders and decision makers. So that's the relationship these individuals have to me. But there is a key person that I need to keep in mind. Her name is Virginia. She's the most senior leader in this group. And I need to keep my eye on her because you never know what she's thinking. But I don't think it's going to be a difficult sell for her. And then, of course, I mentioned earlier, we've got these pain points with our vendor situations in the supply chain. So I'm going to have to deal with that in one way or another in my presentation. Moving over here, how much they care about the goal. This is a big deal. This is a very, very big deal. They care a lot. Are they going to be difficult to persuade? No, but I do need to make them feel comfortable. Now, as you can see, I didn't answer all of these questions because some of these were more important to me, given the situation that I'm in. You, however, should make sure that you read through all of these options and figure out, is there anything that's really relevant to my group? And of course, these aren't the only questions you should be thinking, but these should get the creative juices flowing.
it. I
So
think, oh, sorry.
taking, Dale,
Go ahead, finish that section, and then I'll say something.
okay. So taking these steps may feel like, oh, I know this in the back of my head. I don't need to do this. But by taking a few moments and being intentional with this, it helps you understand the level of detail you need to go into, what to leave in and what to take out. That's really important for subject matter experts. The degree of persuasion, the order of the agenda. In other words, what order do they need to hear information from me? And it might also help us uncover some cultural considerations. In other words, for those of you who work in global companies, it's no surprise to you that different people make decisions differently. And that might bubble up as you're thinking about your audience as well. Okay, Dale, I'll turn things back to you.
The last thing I want to say about assessing your audience is that it's a best practice to be a little bit cynical about them, to assume that when they come into your meeting, whether it's face to face or remote, that they don't want to be there for whatever reason. And doing that will help you think about the questions on this page a little more carefully because the fact that somebody might be overwhelmed with a project they're working on and you are taking them away from that will help you deliver a frame that brings them into this conversation. So you want to make sure that you're always considering the idea that you need to work a little harder than you might think to get them with you. And well, just an example that we teach, we come into an organization with a video camera, we aim it at the people in our workshops and we record them. And we know not a single person in that room wants that to happen. And so we always have that sort of hurdle to get over. We need to earn trust really fast so that they can not be intimidated or frightened or concerned about the fact that we're going to be putting them in an uncomfortable situation. So that's my wrap up with that slide. Let's go to the next one.
There we go.
Okay, step 3, name their current situation. That's important, well, it relates to what I just said, because you want to think about what is their frame of mind when they come in the door, when they start listening to you. So if we look at the right-hand side here, we can see that with persuasive presentations, the current situation is often, as the bolded words say, an opportunity, a problem, or an obstacle. Examples there: in retail wants to increase sales, process isn't working, the buyer is looking for the best product or service. If you're doing a problem solving presentation, you state the problem in the current situation, sort of the don't be afraid of the elephant in the room sort of approach. You want to say in the frame, here's why we're here. Here's why you need to listen to what I have to talk about today. Now, in informative presentations, the current situation is the fact that the group needs what you're talking about. They might need that update for a project they're working on. Second bullet, a new process has been put into place and the audience needs to understand what it is. And they might hate the new process. We run into that a lot. We're working with trainers. Somebody decides from above something needs to change, and the people that have to execute that change have to be convinced that it's worth their efforts and that they can do it and that it's important that they do it. Or they need the information moving down to the bottom there to make a decision. So in many situations, as I said, the current situation is about a state of mind. They're frustrated or they're uncomfortable. There are the two examples there. And acknowledging those things can do a lot to earn goodwill at the beginning of your presentation. If you were to say, I know a lot of you have been really frustrated, and are trying to get rid of that frustration for you. I'm going to talk today about what we think the best way to approach that is. By acknowledging what they're feeling, you might have an easier time getting them on board rather than sort of suppressing that and letting it sort of simmer under the surface. You want to bring it up and make it part of the frame. Okay, Greg, back to you.
All right. So in the scenario we're talking through, my audience's current situation is this. They have a big desire to be first to market with this product. However, they are concerned about the history with the certain vendors in the supply chain. So at the very beginning of my presentation to them, I'm going to have to deal with both of those, which allows me to set context and put the conversation directly in their brains and how they are currently thinking about it. So now let's move on to step 4.
Organizing your agenda is step 4. And then the agenda for your presentation is just a list. It's just, here's what I'm going to cover. And we really recommend including it because it helps people understand how the presentation is structured. As you can see over there on the right, there are just a couple of considerations that I want to point out. Does the information follow a natural order? Chronological, regional, problem, solution, cause, effect, any of those. If it does, that's the order of your agenda. If it's important to go from A to B to C, do that. When it's not, think about your audience, think about who's the room, and organize the agenda from what their perspective is most to least important. So that might mean adjusting the way you look at the information that you're delivering and delivering it in an order that is not quite as intuitive for you, because you have a way of thinking about the content you're delivering that may not be the same way they think about the content. This an example of this might be, you might want to talk about the effect of the change that's going to take place before you get into any details of what the change actually is. Doing that will help them understand what the steps are in that change and help them understand why it's important to them rather than putting that importance statement at the end of your agenda. Okay, let's keep going.
All right. So, given my situation, here's my agenda. I'm going to very early on make the recommendation that I think we should go with this product. Then I'm going to turn things over to Glenn to talk us through some new vendor agreements that he's put into place. Then I will review the new market research and review the consumer demand, and we'll wrap things up with Inez, who is going to work through the manufacturing capability. So I now have an agenda in place. And that brings us to step 5, Dale.
Step 5, identify the benefits to your audience. This one is about talking about clearly what the takeaways are for them. So as you can see on the left, what will your audience gain from this presentation? And then if we look at the details on the right, we can see with persuasive presentations, the benefits will be realized when they take your recommendation. In other words, you're trying to sell them on something and they buy it. Benefits are, for example, higher sales, greater profit, less waste, lower turnover, satisfied customers, all of those things. By stating those in the frame at the beginning of your presentation, you are setting yourself up to tie back to those things as you move through the details because you want your presentation to hang together really tightly. And by stating this will help you satisfy your customers more. When you get into the details and the nitty-gritty of the body of the presentation, you can say, right, this step right here is going to really connect with customer satisfaction because it's going to make their contact with you much easier to manage, much safer, faster, easier, whatever it happens to be. But you can take a feature of whatever you're talking about and connect it back up to a benefit of it. In informative presentations, they will be, and perhaps the examples are, informed enough to make a decision. You'll clear up confusion that they might be experiencing, or they'll know how to function after a reorg. All those things, especially with informative and a data-heavy presentation, are important to emphasize because you don't want them sitting there listening to you thinking, why do I need to know this? What in the world does this have to do with me? Your benefit statement makes that clear at the beginning. Okay, Greg, back to you.
All right. The benefits to my audience are 3 things. They will be able to make the decision, they'll be comfortable with it once they do, and will be able to set next steps to keep this train on the tracks. So now that we've done the analysis, now we're ready to put all of that into action, which is around setting context. So let me explain to you what I mean by that. Here, this is the next page in the handout that we will be giving you. There are some sticky notes. There's the audience current situation, the goal, agenda, and benefits to them. Guess what? That should sound really familiar because we've already done the brain work. So what we're going to do now is we're going to bring that information that we've already created and put it into one place in one page using these sticky notes. So the current situation, desire to be first to market, and I will have to recognize supply chain concerns. The goal is to help them make a decision on product X. You can see I have listed my agenda here, and then the benefits of greater comfort moving forward and able to set next steps. So now I've done that work. Now it's time to frame up the conversation. Let me show you how this works. So there's a little bit of chit chat, and I say, well, let's go ahead and get started with the presentation. I want to recognize, and I agree that we have a desire to be first to market. However, we have these supply chain concerns that we have got to get our arms around if we're going to be successful. So my goal for today's presentation is to help you make a decision on product X. So the agenda will look like this. I'm going to make a recommendation and headline. My recommendation is to go. Then we're going to take a look at some new vendor agreements that Glenn has been working on. Then we'll talk about new market research and review consumer demand. And we'll round things out with Inez, who is going to talk with us about the manufacturing capability. When we're done right here, I think you'll all agree that you will have comfort moving forward so that we can set some next steps. Now I took about 30, 45 seconds, and I've answered 2 really important questions. What are we talking about and why? So by answering these questions, I've now laid the foundation for the rest of the presentation to make sense. And I'm working really hard to make it easy for everybody. Now let's take a look at another example. Let's say the brain work, the analysis has already been done, and this is a marketing analytics conversation. So let's say that I am the analyst. So the audience's current situation here, well, let me just model this. Everybody, thank you for joining me today. I want to recognize that the organic website traffic is trending down. This is not something that anybody is not aware of. We all know this is happening. The other thing is that the competitors are getting higher search results, and this is leading us to a fear of losing market share. So my goal today is to explain why that's happened and then lay a path forward. So the agenda is going to look like this. I'll walk you through the analytics. Then I'm going to walk you through how to combat the competition. We'll do that through organic SEO and keyword rewrites, and then also some paid ads. And then we will talk about how to maximize our existing traffic. The reason we're doing this, as we all know, is we need to maintain our market share. So again, very quickly, I was able to answer the questions, what are we talking about and why? Now, here's another example. I don't know if any of you do sales demos with software, but if you do, this would be for you. Let's say that the buyer here, the client, has been working with a guy named Shane in sales, and they've brought me in to answer a few questions. So I might frame up the conversation like this. Well, I understand that you've been working with Shane and you have a few questions, particularly around third-party integrations and cybersecurity. So my goal is very simple today. I want to answer those questions and put your mind at ease. When we're done, you're going to have comfort moving forward with Shane, and then you'll get ready for the data and migration, because I know that's something you're concerned about. So I want to give you a quick acclimation to the interface and then the API admin, which is where I'll answer a lot of your questions, and then we'll get to those security measures. Again, I've answered the questions very quickly. What are we talking about and why? Now, you may have noticed I went in a slightly different order. That's because I wanted to share with you how this tool can be tailored to your own needs. One way isn't necessarily better than another, but by laying out all 4 steps and you can deliver them in any direction, you are answering those questions. What are we talking about and why? Now, Dale talked about how it's our responsibility to make it easy for people to participate. This is a really good tool for making it easy for other people. Now, there's what you know about your topic. We talked about this earlier. There's what your audience needs. By going through this process, you are able to really get yourself clear on exactly what your audience needs. Now, one more concept.
Greg, sorry to
Yes.
interrupt. There's a question in chat about the frame, if you want to take a moment to read that.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kevin. Felicia says, Greg, do you find it's easier to show a slide with these details or to memorize this and speak it to the audience off the cuff? Great question. I'm glad you asked. It really depends. If you're using a slide deck, then why not include an agenda slide or maybe a benefit slide or whatever? You wouldn't necessarily have to label them in the same way that the sticky notes are. You can get creative, but having that visual can help uh, make the concepts concrete in people's mind. What I do often when I'm working virtually and it's just a meeting, I don't have any slides, I'll just drop the agenda into chat. That's good enough. It gives people a visual on where we're going. So thank you, Felicia, for asking that question. Now, there's an image on the slide here of a triangle, and we talked about setting context using the framing strategy. As you work through the content, lead with your point. In other words, start with a thesis statement when a new slide comes up, or be very clear with your recommendation. Or if there's a question that's being asked, start with the short answer. Then you can make a decision or not to go into more detail. But what you want to avoid is blah, 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 blah. So therefore, yes. That frustrates people. Say yes at the beginning and then only fill in with detail if it's necessary. All right, Dale, that brings us to our final agenda point, which is making it easy for you and for them. And I'm going to pass the share over to you.
Can you bring this up? And I apologize if I'm scratching my nose. I feel like I'm covered in cat hair. It's really not very much fun here, but that's what I'm dealing with. Okay, make it easy for you and them. Let's go through this. Now you saw this slide earlier. What I want to focus on here is, of course, make it easy on the right-hand side. So what does this mean? Things we talked about so far: understand your objective and what they need, lead with your point, simplify content, and reduce cognitive load. Now, so far, this first one was answered by the framing strategy. Greg just talked about leading with your point and simplifying content, which usually means cutting back, cutting back, cutting back, making sure that you are delivering only what someone needs to make the decision you want them to make. Now, I want to talk a little bit more specifically about reducing cognitive load. Now, that applies to both you as presenter and the people that you're talking to. One way to reduce cognitive load, which I will define on my next slide, is to use parallel bullets. They, as you can see with this example, each bullet starts with a verb. That is going to make life a whole lot easier for you as you deliver that slide. Try it. If you when you do that and you practice with it, you will see what a difference it makes. Okay, let's talk about cognitive load. Cognitive load is, as you can see in the bold, the amount of working memory being used in your brain, like the RAM in your computer, only for the human brain. When memory usage on your computer is high, the system slows down. The same things happen when you're listening or when you're learning new information. So that's this example pulled from CNN. Now, there's a lot going on here, and there's a lot of potential for cognitive load overload for anybody watching this because there are so many things happening on this visual. We have the image of Brooke Baldwin, who is apparently retiring on the day this aired. We have the headline about that. We have down at the bottom, I guess this is the AP. Is that what's under the three? I'm not sure. Talking about Facebook. And then over on the right, the fourth thing is that we have stock exchange information. So with this slide, if you bring the slide up and start talking about one of these things, or is equivalent to this slide in your real life stuff, people are going to be distracted. There's going to be too much for them to look at, and they won't quite know where to focus their attention. And it's a lot like texting and driving. For presenters, you always assume, oh, they can handle this. They'll be able to listen to me and read this slide, and they can't. You've got to really make sure that you're focusing them and giving them just one thing to look at or think about. And that's the same for you. Don't overwhelm yourself when you're the one in charge. Think about what your cognitive load is and realize that as you prepare, you're preparing to make it easy for yourself to deliver the information. Ways to reduce cognitive load. Let's look at this for just a second. Simplify the content for you and for your audience, and treat slides as show and tell. You want to bring them into the conversation that you have engaged people in. The slide does not exist as a separate line of communication from you. You are bringing those things together, what you are saying and what they are seeing. So what does that mean practically? Treat slides like show and tell. The reason we talk about this is because we want to make the slides part of the conversation, not something that exists outside of it, as I just said. You want to control where people look. As we'll talk about with that image there over there on the right, we have the woman at this point is gesturing to her slide with the two charts on a pie chart, bar chart, and the headline, the slide title that says outcomes. Her job here is to direct the listener's focus to the slide. Where does she want them to look? Tell them what they should look at. Point to it. All of those things will help people know where they should direct their attention. When you're finished with that, you can move away and re-engage with them. So you sort of you have due diligence to the slide, make sure the slide is doing its job, and then you can talk about the slide after you're finished with that. That's what we mean by bringing the slide into the conversation. When you're working, this is important in person and virtually. Obviously, in person, you can point to the screen, you can add animation as we've done here with this slide, and you can use descriptive language. The graph on the right, the pie on the left, those things can really help people know where to focus their attention. And as Greg did, as I was going through the audience analysis section, use the zoom tool in PowerPoint. If you roll your mouse down to the bottom left corner of the screen, there's something that looks like a little magnifying glass. Click on it, and you can magnify portions of the screen that you want people to focus on. All of that makes it easier because they know where to look. Let me go forward. I want to talk a little bit about slide titles. They seem like an afterthought sometimes. and they really shouldn't be. So let's talk about this character from the book, the first book he wrote. His name is Lewis. He's high energy, he's disorganized, he's in his head, he's forgetful, and so he has very high cognitive load happening with him because there's just so much going on inside his own head. And if you look at this slide of Lewis's, we have a bar chart, and what the bar chart represents is gross sales. Okay, that's accurate. That is what the bars are as we move across the months there at the bottom. But it doesn't really help him deliver this slide. So if you were to change the slide title to month-over-month sales growth, it would not only help Lewis remember what the point of this slide is, but also help the people that he's talking to understand what the point is. You can also use a trigger to talk about, what happened during a certain period of time to increase sales between April and May. That is a reminder for Lewis and for the people he's talking to as well. It's and you could set this up. Let me move your videos a bit. What happened here is interesting. Let me tell you a story. He may have forgotten to tell that story without that trigger. And this happens to me all the time. I go into a presentation or a training session with very good plan, insert this detail here, tell this story here, and in the moment I forget. And so I need a slide to help me remember those things. And it happens to everybody. You don't want to beat yourself up because you've forgotten something midway. You don't want to, just to guarantee that doesn't happen, you'd have to memorize something, and that's the last thing you want to do. So just use your slides to help you and to help the people that you're talking to.
And Dale, I just
Finally,
want
I want
to
to talk about,
point out that
yeah,
that is what happened to me earlier. I became distracted and I forgot to introduce Kevin. And then as we were midstream, I was like, oh, I forgot to introduce Kevin. I can't do that. I don't want to make him mad at me. So then there's in the moment, my cognitive load is up. I'm trying to figure out how am I going to rescue the situation. So it happens to all of us, as you said, and we just, we deal with it, and everyone's human. Everyone understands that that happens. No big deal.
it goes back to the idea that this is a conversation. Conversations are not perfect. Conversations jump around, and that's okay. And it's hard sometimes for SME to realize that because they're so focused on what they know and what they want to present and their expertise. You really have to let yourself make some mistakes. It's okay. That's the nature of the beast. Just make sure that you're setting yourself up as best you can to control the process. And one way to do it, getting back to this slide, is to create clear labels. If you're using, I don't, this is about memory. Okay, let's look at an example. Two ways of thinking about this. A labeled diagram, as Mind Tool says, places a lower demand on working memory than one that has labels listed at the side. So if you look at this image on the right-hand side of the slide, much harder to understand. To go, okay, one, okay, that's over there. Two, all right, that's the box. To put those labels on the image, easier for you, easier for everybody. During the prep stage, what's easier for you is to do what's on the right because you don't have to mess around if you're in PowerPoint, making sure you get all those text boxes in the right spot. And it's just easier to just list them. Always think about how that slide's going to be received and do the work you need to do to make it easy for everybody. Because when you bring in, I talked earlier about bring the slide into the conversation. The one on the left is so much easier to do that with. So take the time up front to think about how you're using your graphics for ease of delivery. Okay, Greg, going to stop here and give it back to you.
Yeah, let's bring this thing home, shall we? So, you were introduced to this concept of wearing two hats. And over the course of the last 50 minutes or so, I hope that we've been able to start to give you some tools, techniques, insights to be able to get more comfortable with the communicator hat. We talked through this notion of making sense of a pile of Legos. That's the information, all the data in your brain, and then somehow figuring out how to make it useful for your audience because that's what they pay you for, right? It's a really, really important. It's not just the analysis, it's the what are we going to do with this information. Now, Dale introduced us to this concept of the orderly conversation, and I just want to really hit home that your success occurs through the conversation as it unfolds. Don't be afraid of the zigging and the zagging and the flipping and the flopping. That's part of the nature of the work to be done. And it actually goes back, Felicia, to the question that you asked earlier. I intentionally left a piece of your question out because I knew I wanted to address it now, which is you asked, should we be memorizing the opening or the frame of a presentation? Probably not, because Dale said one of the last things you want to do is memorize. And the reason for that is because you're not an actor. Actors memorize stuff so that they can recreate the same experience night after night after night in the theater or, in a movie through multiple takes. That's not your job, though. You're not an actor, you're a communicator. And so don't get yourself so locked into a script that it pulls you out of in the moment and being able to manage the conversation. So that might mean that you load up your slides a little bit more than you might otherwise to spark the right thoughts. Have your notes with you. It is perfectly fine to have notes, especially when you're working virtually. So we want to make sure that whatever you do in the preparation sets you up for a successful conversation once the presentation starts. Now, if you are interested at all in getting yourself to the next level or your team members, I'm the sales guy around here, and Kevin is going to drop my meeting scheduler into chat where if you want to talk about how we might be able to bring some of these concepts to your teams, just he'll drop that. Oh, there he is. He just dropped it into chat, and you can set up a meeting with me. We do webinars regularly, and some of you, we certainly recognize faces and names. So the next one coming up that you are more than welcome to join us for is on September 3rd, and this is going to be called Feedback Without Fear, Coaching that Builds Employee Engagement and Retention. So this is specifically for managers who are providing feedback for their direct reports. Kevin he's one step ahead of me. He's already dropped the registration into chat. He's also going to drop in some resources. We talked about the books that we've mentioned, that we've written, and this framing strategy worksheet. Of all of the things that we teach in our workshops, the framing strategy worksheet is by far the most popular tool that we have. People really, really latch onto it. So please use it in your day-to-day work. And that brings us to our thank you. So I'm going to take away the slides and go to gallery view. Thank you all so very much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. I know we had a little bit of audio issues and distractions with cats. Sorry about that, but everybody who works from home knows that sometimes is the way it works. So thank you all very much for joining us. We will entertain questions, though, if anybody has them. But if you need to get to your next thing, feel free to move on as well.